From advertising to software as a service to data.
Across all of our programs and clients, we've seen a 55 to 65% open rate.
Getting brands authentically integrated into content performs better than TV advertising.
Typical lifespan of an article is about 24 to 36 hours.
If we're reaching out to the right person with the right message and a clear call to action, then it's just a matter of timing.
Welcome to the MarTech Podcast, a Ben J. Schaap LLC production. In this podcast, you'll hear the stories of world-class marketers that use technology to drive business results and achieve career success. We'll unearth the real-world experiences of some of the brightest minds in the marketing and technology space so you can learn the tools, tips, and tricks they've learned along the way. Now here's the host of the MarTech Podcast, Benjamin Shapiro.
Welcome back to the MarTech Podcast. It's just you and me today, marketers. For those of you who are new to the MarTech Podcast community, in this episode, like we do at the end of every month, I tell you how we practice what we preach in the marketing and production of this show. Well, my marketing friends, just making it to this month is a milestone in itself. This is our 12th monthly update, which means the MarTech Podcast is officially 1 year old. Sing it with me now. Happy birthday to you. Okay, that's enough. Anyway, thinking back on how the show has grown over the last year, I just want to start off by sharing my gratitude to you, our listeners. So far, as a community, you've downloaded this podcast over 120,000 times, which means that in our first year, we averaged over 10,000 downloads per month, which I think is a great accomplishment. What's even harder to believe is that the show has grown from roughly 300,000 downloads a month to more than 20,000 downloads a month. And on a personal note, shifting my career from being a marketing operator and a consultant to primarily being a podcast producer and host has been super rewarding and gratifying. I've learned more about marketing this year than at any other time in my career. So thank you for sticking with this show and helping to give me this opportunity to learn about our industry. And I hope that I've been able to provide value back to you. That said, this is also the end of Q1. So I want to talk about how we are progressing towards our goal this quarter and in 2019. So just to recap what we're trying to accomplish at the MarTech Podcast this year, we divide up our goals into two groups. Our non-quantifiable goals for this year are to understand who our listeners are, mitigate our risk by developing new marketing channels, adding utility to our listeners through multiple different formats of content, and evaluating the opportunity to expand the MarTech Podcast into a podcast network. In terms of our quantifiable goals, we want to reach 100,000 download per month before the end of the year. We're trying to drive $100,000 in MarTech sponsorship revenue. We want to have 100 different networking contexts. We want to create a new podcast and potentially even revive an old one that I've worked on in the past. So for starters, let's talk about how we did this month and this quarter. This month, at the time of this recording, the MarTech Podcast has been downloaded roughly 21,500 times. With roughly 3 business days to go in the month, it looks like we're going to land somewhere between 23 and 24,000 downloads, which is roughly a 4,000 to 5,000 download increase from last month. That's between a 21 and 26% month-over-month growth rate, which exceeds what our pace has been over the last 6 months. So we're excited with how the show has grown this month. In terms of our marketing efforts, we invested in 3 marketing channels this month. Knit, which is a podcast advertising platform. The Inside Newsletter, which is a way to reach people that are specifically marketers in their inbox, and Taboola, which is a native advertising platform. And this month, by the end of the month, we're going to spend just around $5,000, which makes our blended CPA roughly 21 cents, and our cost per new downloads somewhere between $1 and $1.25, which is right around where we want it to be. Taking a step back and thinking about the quarter as a whole, the show has basically doubled since the end of Q4 and generated roughly 60,000 downloads this quarter. I budgeted to spend between $15,000 and $18,000 on marketing this quarter, and we actually ended up underspending with a total cost of $13,000. So that means our average cost per download this quarter on a blended rate was 22 cents, and our cost per new download for the entire quarter was $1.10, which I think is a great figure. You know, if we can stay close to $1 per download, we're right on pace to hit our download goal for the year. In terms of evaluating our investments, we relied very heavily on the KNIT platform, which is dynamic ad insertions. We invested $8,000, which is roughly 60% of our budget on KNIT. That said, one of our goals for this year is to mitigate risks by cultivating new marketing channels. So we spent a lot of our budget testing new channels in the quarter. And some of those channels are the Inside Newsletter, which is a newsletter platform that allows you to put your ads in context and reach people in their inbox. We tested display advertising in podcasts through an app called Overcast. And we also, as I mentioned, use Taboola, which is native advertising. The last channel that we tested was an App Store optimization agency, and that didn't work out so well. Out of the $5,000 we spent cultivating new channels, the most efficient way to spend our budget was the Inside Newsletter. So we plan to more heavily invest on that channel coming up in the next quarter. That said, in terms of our other tests, it's a little early for us to say how Taboola has performed. We invested $1,000 at the end of this month, and the goal for our Taboola campaigns is to figure out if there's a way that we can extend the life of some of our content. So we're trying to take our content archive and try to resurface it to a new audience. In terms of the other platforms, Overcast, we spent $600, and we didn't really see any significant bump during the month that we were advertising. And because the ads were so slow to spend, it's just too hard to figure out whether that's a channel worth investing in. As I mentioned, our App Store optimization efforts were not successful. Our plan was to pay an agency $3,000 a month to get us in the top 75 of the Apple iTunes podcast rankings for business shows. And what we found out that Apple made an algorithm change, or at least that's what we were told, partway through the campaign. And we ended up ending the contract early and were refunded a portion of our existing investment. So what we learned from this quarter and from these advertising tests, I think we found another channel in the Inside Newsletter, and we're going to test how that has the ability to scale over this next quarter. We're still going to continue to test native advertising through Taboola, and I think that Overcast and the App Store optimization campaign that we ran are probably not very high on our list of things to test moving forward. In terms of monetization of the podcast, we generated $27,000 in sponsorship revenue through a mixture of integrated ads and advertorial content. And our goal for the year is to generate $100,000 of revenue, so we're very much on pace to reach our goals. While I'm excited that we were able to generate enough revenue to be on pace to hit the goal, while I'm excited to be able to generate that type of revenue, my biggest concern going into this quarter was to find the balance of creating content that you, our listeners, are interested in, and also finding a way to support our advertisers and provide them value. So this quarter, I'm happy to say that we were able to deliver over 100,000 ad impressions, which is more than twice as much as what we had promised. And we created advertorial content that was listened to for over 100 hours. So at the end of the day, I think that we are off to a very good start in terms of our ability to support advertisers. And we learned a ton about the process that we need to go through to get these campaigns up and running. As I try to put this quarter's performance in perspective, if our revenue stays flat, we're still going to be on pace to hit our revenue goal. So I feel like we're in a good place to generate enough revenue to accomplish what we want to. That said, our plan is to invest as much as $60,000 to $70,000 throughout the year to reach our 100,000 download per month goal. So we need to keep driving revenue. I think we're in a good place to do that. We want to make sure that we're investing back into marketing channels that have the ability to scale to continue to grow the show. So our show doubled over the quarter to nearly 24,000 downloads. So if this trend continues, we double in Q2, that puts us close to 50,000 downloads. And then we double in Q3, that puts us close to 100,000 downloads at the beginning of Q4. So I think we're very much on pace to hit our goals. Whether we continue to double quarter over quarter, that remains to be seen. But I'm excited, I'm optimistic, and very appreciative of how this show has performed. So as always, I want to thank my production team. We moved to publishing content 5 days a week this month, and they did not miss a beat. Thanks to all of this quarter's guests for being willing to share their experience. And again, thank you to our listeners for lending us your ears and your attention and to help us build a community around our shared industry in marketing and technology. As we move forward into Q2, we're going to be launching our newsletter to provide you with a better way to interact with our content. If you're interested in subscribing to the newsletter to get a recap of our week's content, you can go to benjshap.com/newsletter, and we're going to send it out once a week. We're going to provide not only links to all of the articles, summaries to all of our posts, contact information for our guests, and some milestone announcements and a couple other neat little tips. But we're going to continue to focus on expanding our reach. We're going to create more compelling content and value and find new ways to build community around the needs of the modern marketer. So just want to say again, thank you for helping us to build and grow this community around MarTech and for making the most of what has been a surprisingly rewarding quarter for us. We're appreciative of your ears. Thank you for listening. And as always, my advice is to focus on keeping your customers happy.